All right, everyone, get ready, because today we are going deep, deep into ion channels.
Tiny but so important.
Exactly. They're like these tiny little gatekeepers in our cells,
You're
right? And they control the flow of all these charged particles, and that makes everything possible: thinking, feeling, moving.
Pretty much, yeah. If you think about it, like if our cells are like these bustling cities,
Oh, I like this analogy.
the ion channels are like the border crossings.
Okay.
They're controlling who gets in and who gets out, like which citizens or, in this case, ions.
Molecular citizens.
Yeah.
I love it. So we had a listener write in and specifically ask for a deep dive on ion channels.
Yeah, a good one.
So that's what we're doing today. We're focusing on ion channels, their structure, how they open and close, and why they are so essential for our bodies.
That's a great place to start.
Yeah, so let's start with the basics. What are these channels made of? How are they put together?
Okay, so picture this ion channels are these intricate structures made of proteins.
They're proteins, got it.
And these proteins, they assemble to form a pore or a channel, and that spans the cell membrane. It's like a tunnel.
Yeah, like a tunnel through the cell membrane, and that creates the pathway for ions to pass through.
But how do those protein tunnels get built? What are the building blocks?
Building blocks are called subunits, and they're really fascinating.
Okay.
Think of them like Lego bricks.
Ooh, Legos.
Different subunits can combine in all sorts of ways to create a wide array of channels, each with their own unique properties and functions.
Oh, so that's how we get so many different types of ion channels?
Exactly.
Each one kind of tailored for a very specific job.
Yeah.
You mentioned gating earlier. What exactly does that mean when we're talking about ion channels?
So gating refers to the opening and closing of the ion channel pore.
Okay.
It's carefully regulated. They're not just open all the time.
Right.
So you can think of it like a gate that swings open and shut, controlling the flow of ions through that tunnel we talked about.
Interesting. So what controls these gates? What makes them open and close?
So there are two main mechanisms that control the gates.
Voltage and ligands. So some channels called voltage-gated channels respond to changes in the electrical potential across the cell membrane.
They're sensitive.
Super sensitive, like tiny little sensors detecting even the slightest electrical fluctuation.
Wow, okay, so if the voltage changes, the gate opens or closes.
Yep.
That makes sense. What about the other type, the ligands?
So lighting-gated channels are controlled by the binding of specific molecules like neurotransmitters or hormones.
Okay.
Those act kind of like keys fitting into specific locks on the channel,
Oh.
causing it to open or close.
So it's like a keycard system, but on a microscopic scale.
Exactly. Very precise.
I'm curious, once that gate is open, how do the ions actually move through the channel, and why is that movement so important?
That's where the concept of electrochemical gradients comes in.
Oh yeah, gradients.
Okay, so imagine like a ball rolling down a hill. It's naturally going to move from an area of high potential energy to low potential energy. It's similar for ions. They flow from areas of high concentration to areas of low concentration, and also from areas of like charge to areas of opposite charge.
Okay.
And this movement, it generates electrical signals within cells.
So these tiny movements of ions are what's responsible for the electrical activity in our cells.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
So how does this all tie back into cell excitability, the ability of cells to actually respond to stimuli?
Yeah, good question.
So these ion gradients play a vital role in creating the electrical potential across the cell membrane. A kind of voltage difference. Think of it like a battery.
Okay.
It stores potential energy that can be released to power all these cellular functions.
Right.
And this electrical potential is essential for cells to be excitable, to respond to signals, and to actually carry out their tasks.
So maintaining these ion gradients is like keeping that battery charged,
Exactly.
ready to power all the cell's activities.
Yeah.
That's amazing. But how do scientists actually study these channels?
Yeah.
I mean, they're so tiny.
Scientists have developed some pretty ingenious techniques to study these microscopic marvels.
I bet.
One of the most powerful tools is electrophysiology, and that involves using tiny electrodes to measure the flow of ions or the electrical current through individual channels.
Wow.
It's like having a tiny little microphone listening in on the electrical conversations happening inside a single cell.
So they can actually watch these ion channels open and close in real time.
That's right.
That is so cool.
It really is. And by carefully controlling the voltage across the membrane and observing the resulting ion flow, researchers can learn so much about a channel's properties, its conductance, its selectivity, its gating kinetics.
So it's like getting a unique fingerprint for each channel.
Exactly.
Understanding exactly how it behaves in response to different stimuli.
Yeah, every channel has its own unique electrical signature.
Wow, this is incredible.
We're getting a glimpse into the machinery that keeps our bodies running.
Yeah, like we've zoomed into the molecular level, and we're seeing the electrical signals that drive life itself.
That's a great way to put it.
This is amazing.
And we're just getting started.
Oh, boy.
There's so much more to explore about these fascinating channels.
I can't wait.
It really is incredible how these tiny channels are behind so many things going on in our bodies.
It's like a whole hidden world just controlling everything we do with these electrical signals. But are there lots of different kinds of ion channels?
Oh, yeah. Tons. There are tons of families of ion channels, and they each have their own unique characteristics and functions. It's like this big network with different channels doing different tasks.
Okay, that makes sense. Can you give me an example of one of these ion channel families?
Sure, let's talk about potassium channels.
Okay.
They're really important for keeping the electrical balance in our cells, especially in nerve cells. They allow potassium ions to flow out of the cell, which helps regulate that resting potential.
So they're kind of like the reset button.
Exactly.
For the nerve cells to get back to their resting state after they fire a signal.
That's a good way to think about it. It's super important for making sure that nerve cells can fire repeatedly and reliably, transmitting information throughout our nervous system.
Right.
Without them, our nerves wouldn't be able to communicate effectively.
That's wild. So are there different types of potassium channels too?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. There's a variety of potassium channels,
Of course.
and they each have their own specific structure and function.
Okay.
Some are fast, some are slow, some are sensitive to certain molecules or signals, so it adds another layer of control.
So it's like a whole family of potassium channels, each with their own personality and their own role to play.
You got it.
It's amazing how complex it is, all at this microscopic level. But what happens if these potassium channels don't work properly?
That's a really good question, because when they malfunction, it can really mess things up.
Yeah.
It can throw off the electrical balance in our cells and lead to a bunch of problems.
Like what?
Well, let's take epilepsy, for example.
Okay.
In some cases, epilepsy can be caused by mutations in genes that code for these potassium channels.
Interesting.
So these mutations can disrupt the normal flow of potassium ions, and that leads to abnormal electrical activity in the brain,
Right.
which triggers seizures.
So one tiny little malfunction in a potassium channel can have such a huge impact on someone's health.
Yeah, it really highlights how important these channels are for our well-being.
Absolutely. But how do scientists even figure out which potassium channel might be the problem in a condition like epilepsy?
They have a few different ways to do it. They can look at the genetic makeup of people with epilepsy and see if there are any mutations in those genes related to potassium channels.
Okay, so look for the mutations.
Yep, and they can also use those electrophysiology techniques to study the electrical activity of the cells from people with epilepsy and look for abnormalities in potassium currents.
So it's like detective work,
Exactly.
trying to find the clues to see which channel is causing the problem and how it's affecting the signals in the brain.
Right.
That's amazing. But once we know what channel is causing problems, can we fix it?
Well, that's the goal, and that's where pharmacology comes in.
Okay. Researchers are always working to develop drugs that can target specific ion channels.
To fix them.
Yeah, either to enhance their activity or to block it, depending on what's needed for treatment.
So for something like epilepsy, could you develop a drug to fix the malfunctioning potassium channel and prevent seizures?
That's the idea. It's
Yeah.
tough, but the potential is huge. Imagine being able to just target those therapies that can restore that normal electrical activity in the brain and help people with epilepsy.
It's pretty exciting, and it all comes back to understanding these ion channels.
Right.
That's incredible. It's a testament to how powerful science is and how important it is to keep exploring even these tiny parts of life.
I agree. It's amazing how much we've learned about these channels.
Right.
But there's still so much more to discover.
Absolutely. I was reading about a new type of ion channel that was just discovered. It feels like we're always learning new things.
You're right. There's a ton out there still to explore. Like scientists recently discovered this whole new family of ion channels called piezo channels. Piezo channels. What do they do?
They're pretty cool. They're responsible for our sense of touch and sensing changes in pressure.
Oh, wow.
Like imagine them as tiny little sensors all over in our skin and tissues constantly monitoring the physical forces around us.
So when we touch something or like our blood pressure changes, those piezo channels send signals to our brains
Yep,
to
exactly.
tell us what's going on.
It's a pretty awesome system that lets us interact with our environment and keep our internal balance in check.
Right.
And what's even cooler is that these piezo channels have a completely unique structure, unlike anything we've seen before.
Oh, really? How so?
Well, they don't have that traditional pore that we talked about before, formed by those protein subunits.
Yeah,
Instead, their structure is more like a propeller.
a propeller.
Imagine three blades coming together to form that central pore, and when pressure's applied, those blades twist and turn, opening the channel and allowing ions to flow.
So completely different from those voltage-gated and ligand-gated channels.
Totally different. It seems like nature's come up with all kinds of ways to control ion flow.
That's incredible. So the discovery of these piezo channels has got to be opening up a ton of new research.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It has implications for so many things, like understanding and treating chronic pain, even heart disease.
Wow, every time we learn something new about these ion channels, it opens up a whole new world of possibilities.
It really does.
It really shows how powerful curiosity is and how important it is to keep exploring the unknown.
It really makes you think, doesn't it,
Yeah.
all this complexity, these tiny mechanisms happening that we can't even see?
It's mind-blowing. And speaking of things we can't see, you mentioned earlier how scientists use electrophysiology to study ion channels. Can you remind me how that works?
Yeah, so imagine you have this tiny glass pipette. It's super small,
Okay.
and it makes contact with a single cell.
Right.
And that pipette acts as an electrode, and it allows scientists to actually measure the electrical currents flowing across the cell membrane.
So they're basically listening in on the electrical activity of a single cell.
That's a great way to put it. And by controlling the voltage across the membrane,
Oh,
researchers can actually watch those ion channels open and close in response to the changes.
it's like they're opening a window into how the cell is communicating.
Exactly.
Okay, so they apply a voltage, and then if an ion channel opens, they see a little blip of current flowing through it.
Exactly. And those little blips or channel openings can tell you so much about how that channel works,
Like what?
how easily ions can flow through, which ions it likes to let through, how quickly it opens and closes.
So it's like each channel has its own electrical fingerprint.
Yeah, you could say that. And it's not just about understanding individual channels. Electrophysiology also lets researchers study how networks of ion channels work together
Oh, wow.
to generate those more complex electrical signals like a nerve impulse transmission or muscle contraction.
So we can zoom in and see how all these electrical conversations are happening within our cells and how they work together to create those signals that are essentially life.
Exactly. It's such a powerful tool, and it's really changed how we understand cell communication and how our bodies function. And it all started with these tiny ion channels.
You've really opened my eyes today to this fascinating world of ion channels. I had no idea that these tiny little things were so important for everything.
And we've only just scratched the surface.
I know there's still so much more to learn about them.
From their structures to all those interactions.
It's so exciting to think about how this research could impact our health.
Yeah. Who knows what we'll discover next?
I know. But before we go, I want to leave our listeners with this one last thought.
Okay.
Considering how many different types of ion channels there are, and how complex their interactions are, imagine the possibilities for manipulating these channels to treat diseases.
It's pretty amazing, right? Understanding ion channels is like having this secret map to how our cells communicate. It could completely change medicine.
I love that, a secret man. Well, thank you so much for taking us on this incredible deep dives into ion channels. It's been so fun to learn about the complexity and the beauty of life at this microscopic level.
The pleasure was all mine. And to our listeners, keep exploring, keep asking those questions. Never stop being curious about the world around you. There's always something new to discover, especially when you dive deep into that microscopic world of our cells.
That's great advice. And to all our listeners, thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep those brains buzzing.